Hey everybody, so this is going to be a video that goes over some of the kind of intro to Malifaux. Malifaux is a game that's produced by Wyrd. It's a smaller scale kind of skirmish game in contrast to something like Warhammer 40k where it's a bit larger, requires more models, a little more costly to get into. So this video is just going to review some of the kind of introduction, the starter to play Malifaux. It's not going to cover all of the rules that you're going to find in the larger rule book, but it's just going to kind of give you an idea of how it plays and introduce you to some of the rules. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. So this video is going to be going over the Quickstart rules that can be found in the intro box that you can buy for Malifaux. You can find it on Amazon or Miniature Market. Usually costs anywhere between like $40 and $60, which is a pretty affordable price to be able to get into a game like this. It gives you enough components to play with 2 people. It's a smaller army. I'll show you the contents of the box, and of course you can expand on it as you get further into the game. But the box set itself comes with a quick start rule guide, which I really appreciate about Malifaux because it actually gets you jumping right into the game really quickly, so you can almost immediately start playing, which is kind of unheard of with games like this. With Warhammer 40k, they're starting to do similar type of things, but it really involves a lot of reading prior to getting to actually putting models on the table. And this gets you right in there. So we're going to be going over the quick start rules. The rules themselves, they look like this. And what's also kind of neat about Wyrd-Games is that they offer the entire rule set online, so you can actually find it and look at the full rule set for free as a PDF. So the theme of Malifaux is kind of sort of a steampunk-esque with horror mixed in. I won't spoil the fluff. There's a lot of that which you can read within the rule books that are out for it, which I would recommend reading through because that's part of the fun of the game is getting to know sort of the different factions and why they're feuding. But anyways, we're just going to be covering the game itself as well as contents of the starter box here. So here's the contents of that starter set that I was talking about. So again, it comes with the rule set there. You're going to get 2 decks. These are called Fate decks. We'll go over what those are. You're going to get 2 factions to start with. The red there is Guild, and then the purple is the Neverborn. And then it also comes with 2 measuring tapes, which I only have 1 out currently, but you're going to need that for the game as well. And then all the characters themselves have character cards that go with them, and we'll review what those are. As far as what you'll need to play Malifaux, the starter set will allow you to right away start playing with 2 people. Now, the set itself is smaller, so you're not going to be able to do everything that you could do with the full expanded rule set. However, it'll at least give you an idea of how Malifaux plays. You can look at the full rule set online and try out some of the more expanded missions, and then decide whether or not you want to add to your factions and go further into Malifaux. So the starter actually comes with the 2 Fate decks, as I noted before, but the Quick Start rules will also explain how you can use a normal deck of cards and then just change the suits if you're, only have maybe 1 Fate deck. A game of Malifaux is also played typically on a 3-foot by 3-foot table. The table that I have these models on is roughly 4 by 4, so it might be a little bit bigger than what you would expect for a game. When you get further into playing Malifaux, there's actually going to be different ways of setting up your models on this 3-foot by 3-foot table, and there are cards that explain that when you begin the game. So taking a closer look at the Fate decks, what you'll see is that there are 4 different types of suits in Malifaux. Now, as I noted before, you can use a normal deck of cards. You would just be changing the suits to the Malifaux suits, and so the Quick Start Rules actually has a guide for how you can do this easily. So there are 4 different suits in Malifaux. We have rams, you have tomes, looks like a book, you have masks, and you have crows. So also of important note regarding the Fate decks in Malifaux is that they're actually 54 card decks each, so not the typical 52 card decks. That's because each deck both include 2 jokers. And so in Malifaux you have a red joker, which is actually represented as a 14 and can be any of the suits that I just described. And then you also have what's called the Black Joker, and the Black Joker is of no value and has no suit. And so each of these jokers also have some additional rules on them. We'll go further into that as I go a little bit further into the rules. So when we talk about measuring in Malifaux, you're going to be measuring from the model's base. All the models are on round bases that they come with, and you want to make sure you're also putting these models on the correct bases. Their cards, which I'll show you later, actually indicate which base they're supposed to be on. But measurement occurs by measuring from each model's base. And so if we take a look at the nurse here, I would put the measurement tool up against the base and then measure out from there. So another thing to take note with measurement in Malifaux is that it's done in inches, and you're also able to pre-measure, which means that prior to a movement or maybe a ranged attack where you're having to make a measurement to another model, you can go ahead and pre-measure to make sure that you can either move that distance or shoot that range prior to determining that is the action that you're going to do. So let's go ahead and move on and talk about stat cards. So each model that you own in Malifaux will come with its own stat card, and of course the picture should be sort of representative of the model so that you don't get them mixed up. So taking a closer look at the character card, what we see is at the top, first off you notice, is the model's name. In this case it's a Blood Wretch. Below it are the characteristics of the Blood Wretch, or the model. In this case, the Blood Wretch is a Nephilim, and those are important to take note of because there are some abilities or attributes that can only be activated or affected by someone of those characteristics. Another thing to take note of right off the bat is on the top left, that is the faction symbol. So in this case, the Blood Wretch is a member of the Neverborn. So moving along on the card, the next thing to notice is that the top right, that 5, is the what we call soul stone cost. When you're playing a game of Malifaux, there's going to be a point system to it to decide how big of a game that you're going to be having. So you might play what's called like a 25 soul stone game. We'll go more into detail of what that means, but in this case, this model costs 5 of those soul stones to include in your army. So just looking below the soul stone cost, you'll see that black line there with the different numbers. That's the stats of the model. Starting with the DF there on the left, that's the defense. So in this case, the Blood Wretch has a 6 defense. The WP is willpower, so he has 5. The WD is also 5, which is wounds. And then below that, you'll probably see those 5 little kind of bullet holes. That's actually another indication of how many wounds the Blood Wretch has, which again is 5. WK is walk, so the Blood Wretch has a walking distance of 6, which is measured in inches. The CG is the charge. It's a 7, which that's essentially the charge range. If it decides it wants to charge, it can charge 7 inches. We'll talk about what that actually means a little bit. At the very end there on the right is HT, which is height, and it is a height of 2, meaning 2 inches. So you actually have to know sort of what the size of the model is and height for this game, because that's going to affect things like line of sight when you're measuring distances on the table. So as we move down the card, you'll see next there that we have abilities, and below that you'll see different characteristics that the model has, and these are always considered to be on, meaning that it's not something that the Blood Wretch would necessarily choose to do like an action, it's just something he possesses. So if we take a look at on the prowl, the Blood Wretch, after killing an enemy model, the model may heal up to 2 damage. That's something that he just gets to do. So turning the card over, what we'll see is there are a few other characteristics about this model. In this case, the first one is attack actions. These are the actions the model can take to attack other models and cause damage. Below that, we also have tactical actions. Sometimes these are more beneficial to the model. It's actions that they have to spend, so again, it's not a characteristic that is always on like the other ones that I showed you on the front of the card, the abilities. These are something the model has to choose to do, but it's not necessarily something that's going to cause damage to another model. It might be to the model's own benefit, like healing or something like that. And lastly, it's good to take note that at the very bottom right of the back of the card, you'll see the model's base size. So in this case, it's 30 millimeters. So it's the size of the base that this model should be placed on, because again, with measurement and drawing lines of sight, the model's base is very important. So now let's talk a little bit about line of sight and measuring from one model to another model. So in Malifaux, line of sight is kind of like an imaginary line that goes from one model's base to another model's base. And so if you're measuring a distance from one model to another, you're just going to measure from the base to anywhere on the other model's base, typically the closest if you can, but really it's anywhere. You can measure to anywhere on the other model's base. Now why that's important is we're going to be talking a little bit about terrain and what happens if terrain gets in the way of that measurement. Now in Malifaux, you cannot target something that you cannot see. That's where line of sight comes into play. There might be some other attacks and abilities that allow some unique models to do that, but in this case, in general, you can't shoot at or attack something that you can't see. So let's pretend that that purple model on the right is the attacking player and the red model is the defending player. The first thing we want to do, of course, is to make sure the distance is correct and that the range from the attacking player's base is can actually reach the red model's base. But the other thing that we need to see is that in between there, that line of sight, is that line crossing over anything that might be getting in the way to block it. So for instance, this box here, let's say that's maybe a measure of 1 inch, and so these are 2-inch models, so they can actually see over the box. So in this case, the terrain would not be getting in the way of the attacking player's shooting or range. But if we added another box to it, now all of a sudden the terrain is equal to the heights of both these models, and the attacking player no longer has sight to the defending player. So in this case, the attacking player would not be able to draw a line of sight to target the red player, even though that the range might be correct. They no longer have line of sight. This will also come into play when we talk about cover saves, but we're not going to talk about that just yet. So what if the red model is only slightly covered by those boxes there? Now, as stated before, the boxes are the same height as those two models. However, in this case, part of the defending player or the red player's base is in line of sight of the attacking player or the purple model's base. So in this case, the attacking player does have line of sight and can target the red model because at least one line of sight can be drawn to the model that's getting attacked. So now that we've talked a little bit about the mechanics of Malifaux and the characteristics on the model's cards, we're going to start moving into how to perform attacks. Now in the Quickstart Rules, what you'll find is they get two people playing right away, and at this point we're going to be moving to our first encounter, which is going to be called the Hallway Rumble, and it's going to cover just how to do a basic melee attack against another opponent. So we're going to ignore the abilities of each of these models for this point in time, and we're going to go straight into just how to perform a normal attack. So we're beginning our first encounter here with both the Neverborn, which is the Blood Wretch, as well as the Orderly as part of the guild faction. The models have been set up about 1 inch away from each other, which is important because melee attacks within Malifaux do not have to occur base to base, and so there's actually a range that occurs within melee, and we'll cover that here in a second. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is each of the players are going to be drawing 6 cards from their deck. So each of the players now have a hand of 6 cards. These cards are hidden from the other player, the opponent player, so they're not laid face down like I have them right now, but rather they're in their hands so the other player does not know what you have. Then what happens next is that each player flips the top card of their deck to determine what's called initiative. So whoever has the highest card gets to go first in the game. If it's a tie, you go ahead and flip again and then decide from there. So in this case, flipping for initiative, the Neverborn starts. They flip an 11 of crows, and then the guild flip, and they flip a 13 of masks. So in this case, the Orderly will get to strike first against the Neverborn. So before we go any further with this melee duel, what we do need to do is see what the Orderly can do as far as a melee attack. To do this, we're going to look at the Orderly's back of the card, underneath the label attack actions. So looking at the back of the orderly's card, we see attack actions, and under it we see medical instruments. So that one on the side there on the left actually indicates how much it costs that orderly to perform that action. In this case, it's one action. We'll go into that a little bit more later. But then to the right, we have sort of a stats profile describing what this attack does. So the MI there is the melee attack, and it says melee of 5. In that case, when the orderly attacks the opponent, he's going to draw a card, he's going to flip one from his deck, and then he's going to add that 5 to the result. The RST is resistance. That indicates what the defender has to use on their own stat card to try to defend this attack. So in this case, the resistance says DF, which means defense. So the Blood Wretch will have to use its defense and then add that number to its own card that it's going to flip. And then the range, again, we indicated that melee attacks in Malifaux actually have a range profile to them. And so what you'll see is it has range, it has the claws that indicate that it's a melee attack, and then it says 1, which means that the orderly needs to be within 1 inch of another model's base to be able to perform this melee attack. This is an important characteristic to take note of because some models might have a range of 2 or 3 to perform a melee attack, not just a range attack. And then the target suffers 2, 3, or 5 damage. So in Malifaux, there's also a sort of a distribution of damage that you can do to a model depending on how badly you attack them. Okay, so the duel begins, and the orderly decides he's going to use his melee attack of medical instruments, which was just shown on the back of his card. He's targeting, of course, the Blood Wretch. So in this case, he is going to start the duel by flipping a card, and he draws a 12, which is pretty good, a 12 of masks. So the orderly is going to add that 12 of masks to his melee profile that was found on the back of his card. So medical instruments there, you see the melee has 5, that ML right there. So you're going to add that 5 to the 12, and so his attack then becomes a 17. So then what we need to do is we need to go to the defender, in this case the Blood Wretch. And if you look on the medical instruments profile there of the orderly, it says the Blood Wretch must use their defense as part of them defending this attack. So the Blood Wretch goes ahead and flips the card, and we get a 9 of tomes, and then that number is going to be added to the Wretch's defense. Let's take a look at that. So looking at the characteristic card of the Blood Wretch, we see on the stats line there that DF, that the Blood Wretch has a defense of 6, and he just drew a 9 of tomes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add that to the 6, and we get a 15. So in this case, the Blood Wretch is currently losing the melee attack because the orderly, combined with the card that he drew and his stat line, he is at a 17, and the Blood Wretch is currently defending at a 15. And so right now, the Blood Wretch is going to lose this battle. But the Blood Wretch has an opportunity to change that outcome. So in Malifaux, you can do what is called cheat fate. And there are different things that you can cheat fate with, but one of them is in a battle encounter like this. So those 6 cards that the Blood Wretch drew earlier, he now has a chance of choosing one of those cards from the hand to play instead of that 9 of tomes. So let's take a look at the cards the Blood Wretch has. So now looking at the cards in the Blood Wretch's hand, again, we drew 6 earlier, and we have 6 to choose from. We need to be able to beat that 17 that the orderly is hitting us with. If we just draw him, we'll still take damage, and so we need to actually outright beat him if we want to completely defend ourselves and not take any damage from this attack. So in this case, because we have a defense of 6, we're going to need at least a 12 to get over that 17 we're getting hit with. So in this case, we have a 13 of rams here, and if we go ahead and decide to play this instead, we'll be beating the orderly by 1. So we'll go ahead and play that one. So now coming back to our battle, we've done away with that 9 of tomes that the Blood Wretch drew for its defense, and instead cheated fate and played the 13 of rams in its place. So now we are at 19 in defense, and the orderly is still attacking us with 17. Now because the orderly is losing this melee attack, he now has the opportunity to cheat fate as well. And again, we're going to go to the orderly's hand and see from its 6 cards if it has an opportunity to beat the Blood Wretch. So taking a look at the orderly's hand, we see that he has some low cards, and he has the highest card that you can have, which is that red joker, which is a 14 of any suit that you'd like. And in this case, because his attack profile, melee, is a 5, we would need that 14 just to tie the Blood Wretch currently, which is at a 19 for defense. And as I stated before, in a tie, it goes to the attacker. So the attacker wins in a tie. Now there are some other rules that we'll talk about later on that damage is affected by how much you beat someone by, but for right now, just know that if the attacker ties the defender, the attacker wins the match. And so in this case, we'll go ahead and play that 14, and we can say it's Rams, and that will give us a 19 to tie the defender, and the Blood Wretch will lose this battle. Now, we've both cheated fate, the orderly as well as the Blood Wretch. They only get one opportunity to do that during a battle like this, during an attack. And so even though we're tied now, and technically the Blood Wretch is going to take damage, he no longer has an opportunity to cheat fate. He's going to take the damage. So now that we know that the Blood Wretch is going to be taking damage from this encounter, we need to know how much damage does the Blood Wretch take. So to do that, we're going to take another look at the orderly's card, looking at the back at the attack that he performed, the medical instruments, and as you probably recall from prior, there's actually 3 different numbers on there, so 3 different types of damage that the Blood Wretch could take. Let's take a look. So going to the back of the card of the orderly under medical instruments, we take a look at target suffers. That's the damage values that the Blood Wretch might take from having lost this battle. And what you'll notice is there are 3 numbers there, 2, 3, and 5 damage. Most attacks have a profile like this, where they're going to have different types of damage that can be dealt. And in this case, what we're going to want to do is we're going to flip another card from our deck to determine how much damage the Blood Wretch is going to take from being hit by medical instruments. So to determine how much damage the Blood Wretch takes, we're going to go ahead and flip a card off the top of the deck. And what you'll notice, or maybe you've seen from some of these other cards that have been flipped, is that on each of the cards there is an indicator that either says mild, moderate, or severe. So in this case, an 8 does moderate damage. So something to know about the cards is that if you flip a black joker, that's actually no damage. So you could have done all of this attack to the Blood Wretch and then flipped a black joker on this flip, and you'll deal 0 damage to the defender. If you draw a 1 through 5, you'll be doing weak damage. A 6 through 10 is moderate damage, like the 8 there. An 11 through 13 is what's considered severe damage, and if you draw the red joker on the damage flip, it's actually the severe plus the weak damage, so it's the most damage that you could deal to somebody in a melee attack. So if we consult the back of the orderly's card again under medical instruments, and again look at the damage types, that 2, 3, 5, that's in order of weak, moderate to severe types of damage. So the 2 would be the weak, 3 would be moderate, and 5 would be severe damage. And again, if you drew the black joker, you would actually deal 0 damage. And if you drew the red joker, it would be the severe plus the weak. So in this case, it would be 7 damage because it would be the 5 plus the 2. So the card that we drew, the 8, was moderate, so in this case it's 3 damage. So 3 damage will be dealt to the Blood Wretch. So to know how this affects the Blood Wretch, we again consult his card. So he takes 3 damage, and what we want to know is, well, how many wounds does the Blood Wretch have? And as I said before, you can look at the WD on that stat profile, which is 5, indicating how many wounds he has. You can also just look at the bullet, sort of the bullets there on the card that also indicates how many wounds a model has, and again, it's 5 for the Blood Wretch. So you just deduct how much damage he took from how many wounds the Blood Wretch has. In this case, he took 3 damage. He now has 2 wounds, and you can count this by either putting little counters on the card. Sometimes people put these in plastic sleeves and then mark them off with dry erasers. So there's other ways, or using a die or something like that on the model to indicate how many wounds it has left or how many it's taken. So there's different ways of indicating that. Now, if the Blood Wretch had been hit with severe damage, which would have been 5 damage, that would have removed all the wounds from the Blood Wretch, and in that case, the model would die, and you would take the model off the board, and he would no longer be in play. So that encounter is basically over now that we understand how a basic melee attack is performed. Ranged attacks perform very similarly, and we can talk about that in a future encounter. So this first part was just a basic overview of kind of the game, its components, particularly in the Quickstart Rules, and then just the first encounter looking at the basic kind of concepts of how actions are performed in a game of Malifaux. We're going to go through the Quickstart Rules and continue looking at the other encounters, which will add to the rules that you're learning as you go. Again, that's one of the nice things about this Quickstart set, is that it gets players right into the game very quickly. You're learning sort of the rudimentary functions of the game, how it plays, and then they're just going to add a rule here and there as you start to understand the game components. So part 2 of this basic introduction to Malifaux will go through some of the other encounters that are provided in the Quickstart Rules of the introduction box. And what they're going to do is they'll start to add some additional components to what we've already learned from this first encounter. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned.